Chapter 1797, Last Refuge. Sonny would have loved to be wrong. He would have liked to believe that he had lost his sanity from solitude and hopelessness, or even that he had fallen under the effect of a strange mind hex, that he was looking at an illusion conjured by some harrowing abomination. But in his heart, he knew that his eyes weren't lying to him. Out there in front of him, buried in snow and ice, was indeed Lunar Observatory 49, the research settlement where he had met Bate and Professor Obel once, during the Chain of Nightmares, where dusk of fallen grace killed everyone except for a handful of people that Sonny had taken away in time. The dome of the old observatory was the same. The alloy wall was the same, even if its turrets had turned into ice sculptures. The empty buildings where the scientists, soldiers, and assisting personnel had once lived and worked were the same, too. The research installation stood lonesomely under the starlit sky, drowning in snow. Sonny shivered. How? But he knew how. Windflower had warned him. She had told him that his world would be consumed by the dream realm one day, just like hers. He had known that it was inevitable for a long time. However, Sonny had never thought that the process would have started so soon. I thought we still had time. He remained motionless for a while, taking in the eerie sight of the empty facility with an expression that went beyond despair. It felt so wrong to see alloy walls and prefab structures in the dream realm. Appalling. Sonny had no words to describe what he was feeling. He had left the waking world behind, and yet, witnessing the root of its future destruction had rattled him to the very core. The dilapidated streets of the outskirts, the beautiful terrace district in the inner city, the fortress-like awakened academy, the prestigious school where Rain had studied. Everything he knew would be swallowed by the dream realm soon. Worse than that, all the places that formed the background of his memories would not just be transported to another world. They would become forgotten ruins, just the kind Sonny was fond of exploring, weathered, forlorn, and teeming with revolting abominations. That was the grim future of the world, infected by the nightmare spell. Only, there would be no one to explore the ruins of the waking world and wonder about the people who had populated them once, because Sonny's realm was the last to be consumed. There would be no explorers left to remember their lives and struggles. The waking world would cease to exist, maybe not in a year or even a decade. But the process had already started. Sonny did not know how long he had spent kneeling in the snow in front of the silent research station. Eventually, though, he shakily rose to his feet and walked toward the crumbled wall. He spent some time wandering low 49 in a daze. Back then, Sonny had left in a hurry. After delivering his cohort and the 2 civilians to safety, he mounted Nightmare and returned, but he did not enter the facility again, only looking at it from afar. Everyone was gone, taken by dusk of fallen grace. Even though Sonny killed the terror later with the help of Neve and Saint Bloodwave, the memory of the empty settlement was still connected to a feeling of powerlessness and deep, chilling fear in his heart. Funnily enough, he felt the same way now. Nothing seemed to have changed in Low 49. There was some damage caused by the harsh environment, and the exteriors of the alloy buildings were covered in ice and snow. However, the interiors were in surprisingly good condition. All the tech had stopped working, of course, but the material legacy was all there. There were clothes, furniture, and decorations, kitchen utensils, writing implements, and synthetic paper. The important data had been stored digitally, but many scientists had been in the habit of writing notes by hand or drawing complicated formulas on the boards. There were also useless items people accumulated throughout their lives: toys, trinkets, and sentimental mementos, posters, musical instruments, and handicrafts. Some of it would decay with the passage of time, but actually, most of the things created by modern humans were quite lasting. If someone unfamiliar with the civilization of the waking world visited this place in the future, what would they think about the people who had perished at Low 49? Would they think that the ancient people had been ingenious and worthy of admiration, excelling in craft and architecture? That they created enchanting art, pursued enlightenment, and were quite knowledgeable about the arcane principles that govern the world? Or that the ancient people had been warlike and austere, living in harsh conditions and surrounding their utilitarian homes by tall metal walls? After all, there were weapons and military uniforms everywhere in Low 49 as well. However, there were no corpses, no bones, no signs of a vicious battle. Nobody would know what had happened here, and at best, they would feel idle curiosity about the fate of the missing inhabitants. About as much of it as Sonny had felt in the ruins of the Dark City, before it became vitally important to learn the truth of it all. There was a bitter taste in his mouth. It was because Sonny knew better than most what it meant to be forgotten. Sometimes, not being remembered was worse than death. I hate it. Still unable to come to terms with the dreadful revelation, he remained motionless for a while, and then left the settlement to wander around. It was strange. The research facility was how it had been. Some of its surroundings were familiar, too. But the rest was not. The ocean shore might have been hidden under the ice, but the mountains were definitely missing. After exploring the area more thoroughly, Sonny made sure that he wasn't mistaken. He had almost expected to find the entire Antarctica here, but somehow it was nowhere to be found. There were no mountains, no highways, no underground base that he had used as shelter after meeting Jir and his small convoy of refugees. Instead, there was just an endless plain of ice. It was as if a small chunk had been torn out of the waking world and transported here, then stitched to the patchwork realm of nightmares. No matter how long Sonny looked, he did not find another. Still, the dream realm was vast. There could be more pieces of Antarctica lost somewhere in the ice. Other areas could be elsewhere. Sonny would not be surprised if it turned out that a piece of America was now drifting somewhere in Stormsea, or that parts of Europe could be found west of the forgotten shore. There was no point in continuing the search anymore. Nothing would change if he found another fragment of the waking world here. Sonny looked south, where Low 49 was hidden in the darkness. Then he looked north, at the endless expanse of ice. The desire to explore the unknown that had pushed him forward so far was inexplicably gone, doused by the grim discovery. Letting out a sigh, he summoned the marvelous mimic, commanded it to turn into a hut, and went inside. His mind was numb, and his heart was cold. So Sonny decided to sleep. When Sonny woke up, reality was the same. His dreams did not change the cold, ruthless truth. He had wondered a lot what he would find at the edge of this alien world, but never expected to find the end of his own. Sonny slowly sat up and stared at the wall with an absent expression. Would he still be alone in this frozen wasteland when his crumbling world became one with the spreading dream realm? Reality was the same, but he was not. It wasn't unexpected to change after witnessing something so shocking. He had mused about how small he was in comparison to the colossal stump in the burned forest, but only witnessing the white dome of Low 49 under the strange sky had really put his entire life in perspective. Sonny was quite a self-centered person. He wasn't a narcissist or someone who had no empathy for anyone except himself, but he cared about himself more than he did about others. There were a few people out there he would die for, but even then, it was because they were dear to him, and their loss would hurt him terribly. Only those who had not suffered before were oblivious enough to be truly selfless. People who had experienced anguish and pain knew the value of selfishness, because caring about oneself meant not having to suffer that anguish again. So Sonny was a reasonably selfish man. He was also a man who had experienced all kinds of torment, witnessed great tragedies, and endured it all to continue walking forward. Still, even he could not remain unmoved in the face of the destruction of his world and the extinction of his kind. She was right. Knowledge is indeed the heaviest thing in the world. The winds were howling beyond the walls of the empty hut. The sky was cold and dark. Pale starlight bathed the desolate expanse of ice, reflecting from it in a ghostly radiance. Some distance away, the dome of Low 49 stood lonesomely above the snow. Sonny let out a long sigh. He did not want to, but had no choice except to reevaluate a lot of things. Very important things, including the very concept of the future and his own place in its frightening reach. In fact, even though Sonny did not know what to think yet, he felt that he had already made a few decisions. It was just that he had not realized these decisions yet. Life was so messy. He had gone to Antarctica in search of conviction, thinking that his own was lacking. He did not find what he was looking for there, but instead learned that his own beliefs and aspirations were in no way inferior to anyone else's. Sonny had also learned to despise the sovereigns in Antarctica, the callous ghouls who played their games while countless people died, even though they could extend a hand and save them. He wanted to make his will known, and if not punish the tyrants, then at least prevent their hidden conflict from causing too much collateral damage among the civilian population. He did a few things to realize that goal, but before his efforts truly bore fruit, the Battle of the Black Skull happened. And then Sonny was thrown into the third nightmare. What happened in the tomb of Ariel? Well, he made a proper mess of everything, and then somehow solved it as well. But the way he solved it was more damaging than the nightmare itself. However, those were his personal issues. They had nothing to do with the sovereigns, what he had wanted to do in Antarctica, and the fate of the world. And by the time he returned, the sovereigns had already made their move, and the southern campaign was over. Those refugees that had not been evacuated across the ocean fled into the dream gates and left the waking world. Sonny's immediate goal had no meaning anymore. Sonny himself, meanwhile, was abandoned by the world. He was forgotten, expelled, and erased from existence, untethered from everyone and everything, completely lost. So he left. He left and never looked back, crossing the hollow mountains, the forgotten shore, and the burned forest in solitude, all to leave the world that had rejected him behind, only to find a piece of that world at the end of the journey. What was he supposed to do now? Should he continue to pretend that nothing of what was happening to humanity had anything to do with him now? Should he continue to hide, keep his own company, and slowly lose his mind? Should he continue going north? Just yesterday, Sonny was full of excitement at the thought of exploring the uncharted parts of the dream realm. But today he did not care anymore. The thrill was gone, replaced by a heavy emptiness. Summoning the endless spring, Sonny drank some water, sighed, and then absent-mindedly looked at the beautiful glass bottle. That memory of his had served him well over the years. It was a gift from someone who didn't remember him anymore. His expression turned cold. Of course, there was a different choice to be made and a different destiny to be carved out. Instead of heading north, he could turn around and go back. He could return. And then what? Nobody remembered him. Nephi's, Cassie, Effie, Kai, Jet, Rain, Teacher Julius, St. Tyrus, Bait, and everyone else. They did not think or care about someone they did not know. But Sonny remembered. When I go back, if I go back, I'll have to do a few tricky things. By now, he was powerful enough not to be a mere spectator. Why did he have to simply watch the ruthless players move the figures across the board? Instead, he could exert his influence to personally change the game. A person like him could do a lot when no one was looking his way. The idea of confronting the sovereign seemed like pure madness before. It still did, but was it, really? Could Sonny exert his will and reshape the world to fit his desires? He would have to plot the downfall of Anvil of Valor and Kai's Song. There was the third one, as well, perhaps the most dangerous of the three. But dealing with the sovereigns was only the beginning. Now that the destruction of everything was accelerating, there was only one way forward to the very end. Either the nightmare spell would swallow humanity or be conquered by humans. Supreme, sacred, divine. The end could only be stopped if new gods were born of humanity. Therefore, that was what Sonny had to ensure if he went back. Did he dare to dream it? A long time ago, Nephis had proclaimed her determination to conquer every nightmare. Sonny had thought that she was insane back then. The wind was growing colder outside. He remained silent for a long time, listening to its howling. So what if it's insane? Sonny was not quite healthy in the mental department himself. He had not been for a long time. He did dare to dream it. At this point, there was very little that he did not dare to do. Walking out of the door, Sonny looked at the sky. The sky was full of stars. I am nobody, and I have nothing. He inhaled the frigid air and looked south with a cold, dark gleam in his lightless eyes. So let's change everything. With that, he dismissed the marvelous mimic and reached into his soul, which was still tethered to the waking world. Soon, his figure disappeared from the sea of starlit ice. Instead, a ragged silhouette appeared on a desolate street in the outskirts of NQSC, surrounded by a whirlwind of dancing snowflakes. Sonny returned to the outskirts. After years spent in the wild reaches of the dream realm, NQSC was like an explosion. Sonny almost fell to the ground after being assaulted by a myriad of movements and sensations. There were sounds, scents, and countless scenes. Most of all, there were shadows. A vast legion of them, all moving and changing, surrounding him like a boundless whirlpool. Overwhelmed by them, he spent several days hiding in an abandoned room at the top of a ramshackle dormitory hive. His mind wasn't ready for the sensory overload of being among hundreds of millions of people. Subduing his shadow sense, he waited for a while, slowly preparing himself to face humanity again. Gradually, Sonny let his senses loose, first to envelop a few levels of the dormitory hive, then all of it. Laying in the darkness, he could feel thousands of humans go about their harsh lives, observing their sorrows, joys, and struggles. Then his shadow sense extended outward, enveloping the outskirts one street after another. At some point, Sonny felt as if he was an invisible, omniscient deity. The area he could perceive was too vast for his mind to concentrate on each shadow, to witness every person. And yet, there was no better way of throwing himself into the half-forgotten feeling of being human. Slowly, the feral grip of solitude that the dream realm had on his mind loosened. Sonny remembered how to be a person again. His status in the waking world was questionable. He didn't really exist. A nice family was now living in his terrace district house. He had no money, no citizenship, and no home. Which was pretty much exactly how it had been, back in the days of living as an outskirt rat. A very familiar situation. Of course, Sonny himself was entirely different from his younger self. He was a saint now, which meant that he wasn't just a rat. He was the strongest, most vicious and fearsome rat in the world, the loftiest rat there was. A true rat king. The outskirts themselves had changed, as well. They were much emptier, as if someone had culled the population of this miserable place in the past few years. Sonny knew that many of the most disenfranchised people of the waking world had been seduced by the lure of the dream gates. One of his incarnations had followed Rain to Ravenheart, after all. But knowing and seeing were two different things. Even this place can change, huh? He felt uprooted somehow, but it was a good thing for this part of his past to have changed. Moving in the shadows, Sonny found a better place to stay and thoroughly washed himself. Then, He procured a cheap communicator and a sizable sum of credits. Things that had been insurmountable for him as a kid were easier than breathing now. He did not have to scrounge for food and shelter. He did not have to fear the other humans populating the city slums. He could survive here with no effort whatsoever, live as lavishly as he wanted, even. But what was the point if the world was already falling apart? Sonny did not care about the bitter past. It had no hold over him anymore. He had outgrown the outskirts. After getting himself in order, Sonny sighed, turned into a shadow and reached for the tether. His original body was still tethered to the Ivory Island, of course. The Ivory Island had long left the chained isles by now, and the crushing was no more. With its departure, the force keeping the flying islands afloat had weakened significantly, accelerating the demise of the region. The sanctuary of Noctis was situated at the edge of the chained isles, so it was still safe. However, more and more islands fell into the sky below with each year. In a few decades, most likely, there would be none left, erasing the last remains of the Kingdom of Hope. Except for the ivory tower itself. Sonny had expected to find himself above Bastion, but it seemed that Nephis and Cassie had been sent out to accomplish a mission. The beautiful island was moving across the sky of the Sword Domain, and the Fire Keepers were preparing for battle. Sonny did not disturb them and jumped off the edge, unnoticed. Turning into a crow, he glided to the ground and watched the Ivory Island drift away. Then, with a sigh, he summoned Nightmare and climbed into the saddle. Funnily enough, his destination was in the north. Sonny had plenty of time to consider the situation while getting his bearings in the outskirts, and although he did not have a concrete plan yet, he knew that one place would play a great role in the approaching war. A death zone known as Godgrave. So that was where he headed. Of course, to get there, he had to cross most of the Sword Domain first. Strangely enough, the journey was relaxing. Sonny had spent so much time braving the deadliest regions of the Dream Realm that the territories conquered by humans seemed peaceful and safe. As long as he remained vigilant, nothing here could seriously threaten him. Granted, the Dream Realm was still dire and full of dangers. Overconfidence was still an insidious killer, and one mistake could cost him his life. It was just that the scale of that mistake had to be quite significant now. Nevertheless, Sonny enjoyed the feeling of being at the top of the food chain. He rode Nightmare while 4 of his shadows served as a stealthy vanguard, circling him at a distance. That way, he was alerted of any danger long before it could pose a threat. Sonny avoided the human settlements, but sent his shadows to observe them and collect the news from time to time. He was learning more about the current situation in the two worlds, and slowly working out the basics of a plan. A couple of weeks later, a mountain chain barred his path. It was much less impressive than the dreaded expanse of the Hollow Mountains, but still had a bad reputation. When Sonny was a small child, these mountains were the northern boundary of the human enclave in the Dream Realm. After Valor's northward expansion, though, they were simply a natural barrier in the heart of the Sword Domain now. Sonny studied them with a slightly surprised expression, not because of their historical significance, but for an entirely different reason. These mountains. No way. He recognized them. The steep rocky slopes were barren, and sharp ridges were covered in snow. There was one mountain that towered above the rest, though. Jagged and lonesome, it dwarfed other peaks of the mountain chain, cutting the night sky with its sharp edges. A radiant moon bathed its slopes in the ghostly, pale light. It was the Black Mountain from his first nightmare. Sonny often thought about the slave caravan, but he never actually tried to learn more about the events that had transpired in the nightmare. He knew that they had happened at the dusk of the Golden Age, not long before the start of the Doom War. Back then, the gods had grown indifferent and distant, and the soldiers of an expansionist empire that worshipped war wiped out the shadow cult, burning down all its temples. However, he did not know much about that empire and the lands it had conquered. The history of the Dream Realm was overshadowed by the calamitous destruction of the Doom War, and while it was possible to learn a thing or two about the previous eras, the devastation had erased most traces of the last human civilizations. So Sonny had never actually expected to behold the Black Mountain again. He stared at its distant peak in bewilderment. Then, a sense of subtle curiosity bloomed in his heart. Might as well take a look. Sonny actually felt a hint of sentimentality. Back then, it took the caravan days to scale the mountain pass. Sonny remembered the agony of walking up the mountain road vividly, the cold, the pain, the biting touch of the iron shackles that shredded his wrists. He had felt so tired and weak, not knowing if he would survive the cruel march. Many of the slaves had not, and ended up being tossed off the cliff after falling into the snow. It was a hard thing, to climb a mountain while hungry and on the verge of freezing. Today, Sonny simply stepped into the shadows and appeared halfway up the slope. Step, step, and another step. Just like that, he was standing below the towering edifice of the Black Mountain. Thousands of years had passed since the day the slave caravan was destroyed. The mountain road had already been old and crumbling back then. Now, no trace of it remained. For a few moments, Sonny contemplated staying here for a while to find the old bones. He was curious to know what had actually happened to the nameless slave and Oro of the Nine. Had they escaped the Mountain King, or had they perished? He was quite certain that Oro had survived, but what about the young temple slave? However, Sonny quickly dismissed that idea. It would take him months, or maybe even years, to dig through the snow and find the traces of the caravan, if any traces remained. Even then, there was no guarantee that he would be able to tell anything about the past from them. So with a sigh, Sonny looked up at the peak of the Black Mountain. The only place he could visit was the mysterious temple that had stood there, surrounded by bones. But before that, he could feel enemies rushing at him from all sides. A moment later, the snow exploded, and hideous figures lunged at him with frenzy burning in their milky white eyes. The slaughter was swift and ruthless. Sonny did not even summon a weapon, using the spiked gauntlets of the onyx mantle to crush the abominations. He danced between them like an omen of death, coldly and methodically destroying one after another, until none remained. The snow was painted red by blood, and a fine crimson haze hung in the air. Sonny studied the broken corpses, which littered the ground like a carpet. The creatures were hideous and appalling, resembling something that a mad artist would paint after waking up from a feverish nightmare. Most of them were fallen beasts and monsters, and although he was sure that he had never fought such creatures before, they reminded him of something. Mostly because he had subjugated a legion of Mountain King's larvae in Antarctica not too long ago. Although these abominations were different and much more powerful, they resembled the larvae a lot. Sonny smiled faintly. Will I be reunited with the Mountain King? If that thing wasn't dead, it would have grown much more powerful by now. But no, the chances were slim. The forces of valor had eradicated the most dangerous nightmare creatures in this area of the Dream Realm during their march north, and they would not have tolerated a powerful tyrant remaining in their rear. Even if the Mountain King had survived the thousands of years without leaving the Black Mountain, he would have been dealt with by someone like Whispering Blade, or maybe even Anvil himself. With a sigh, Sonny took another step through the shadows and appeared directly on the peak of the Black Mountain. He stood there motionlessly for a while, looking ahead with an expression of awe on his pale face. The nameless temple was still there under the moonlit sky. At the highest point of the mountain, a vast expanse of flat rock was covered with snow. In the center of it, illuminated by moonlight, stood a magnificent temple. Its colossal columns and walls were cut from black marble, with exquisite reliefs decorating the Stygian pediment and broad frieze. Beautiful and awesome, it looked like a palace of a dark god. At least it did once. Now the temple was in ruins. Fractures and cracks marred the black stones, parts of the roof had collapsed, letting in ice and snow. Its tall gates were broken, as if smashed into pieces by the hand of a giant. The Black Temple did not change at all. It was as if thousands of years had no effect on it whatsoever. The only thing that changed was that now there were even more bones surrounding it. There were thousands of bones scattered around, carpeting the ground. Some belonged to nightmare creatures, while some seemed to be quite human. Come to think of it, why are there so many bones here? Was this where the Mountain King had devoured its victims? Somehow, Sunny doubted it. The tyrant had consumed the slaves right where he had killed them, after all. No, before that. What was this temple exactly? Back then, Sunny remembered Scholar mentioning that pilgrims used to climb the mountain in the ancient times. Who were these pilgrims, and what had they worshipped? He had assumed that this was one of the shadow gods' temples that the Empire had destroyed, but the timing did not make sense. The destruction of the shadow cult was a recent event during his first nightmare, however. The temple looked as if it had been ruined thousands of years ago even then. And when Sunny spilled his blood on the altar, the spell described it as an offering to all the gods. It was just that Shadow had been the only one to answer. Stranger still, the gods had still been alive at the time of the nightmare, and yet the spell spoke of them as dead. Sunny shivered. Had his offering reached the actual gods, and not a substitute of them put in place by the spell? Was the spell even capable of creating illusory copies of the gods? Probably not. If so, what did it mean? And how had Shadow God granted him a blessing from beyond the grave? Well, that last part wasn't that surprising. The gods were the ones who had created things like time and death, after all. So, it wasn't strange to imagine that they had a special relationship with these laws. A god could very well respond to a question before it was asked, and bless a slave who had offered himself as a sacrifice despite being dead. Especially if that altar stood in a very special place. The Black Temple. Sunny hesitated, unsure of what to think. Now that he had found the ruined temple again, he realized that he didn't actually know anything about it. He was certain of one thing, though: this place. It felt sacred. A sense of solemn, silent sanctity was emanating from the obsidian walls of the ancient temple. It looked majestic and beautiful in the moonlight, and although the ground around the ruin was littered with bones, it did not feel vile or ominous at all. With a sigh, Sunny headed toward the broken gates of the temple. And as he was approaching, he felt it. He did not see it, and he did not hear it. He did not even perceive it with his shadow sense. But somehow he knew. There was something in front of him, a vast, invisible, intangible being, one that was reaching out to him, emanating a subtle sense of purity, loneliness, and power. Suddenly, Sunny realized why there were bones scattered everywhere at the peak of the Black Mountain. However, the guardian of the temple did not seem to hold any malice toward him. Instead, there was a sense of joy and recognition. The invisible being was reaching out to something in Sunny's soul. The golden light, the flame of divinity. Sunny's eyes widened a little. I didn't even know. Back then, he had felt nothing when entering the temple, but the bones had been there, which meant that the guardian had been there as well. And yet, it let Sunny in instead of adding his corpse to the pile of bones, because it had sensed a faint mark of divinity on his soul. The Mountain King, too. Since the tyrant entered the temple, it must have been touched by divinity once as well. Sunny had not known how close to death he had come, and how lucky he was to survive. Would it let me pass now? Taking a deep breath, Sunny looked forward and stepped through the gates of the nameless temple. Sunny crossed the threshold, and entered the great hall of the ancient temple. It was just as he remembered it. The vast hall was desolate and empty. Its roof had partially collapsed, letting in the elements. There were piles of rubble on the floor, covered with snow and ice. Cascades of moonlight were falling through the holes in the roof, suffusing the dark hall with a beautiful and otherworldly splendor. Deep shadows surrounded the silver light, not daring to touch it. Everything was silent. Sonny took a deep breath. He had almost expected to find the bones of the Mountain King on the floor, where it had been torn apart by shadow, but there were none. The desolate hall was empty. Enveloping the temple with shadow scents to make sure that there was no danger, Sonny took a step forward. Ice shattered with a brittle sound under the onyx soles of his armored boots, and the ancient shadows stirred, reaching out to him in reverent glee. Surrounded by them, as if wearing a cloak of darkness, he walked toward the altar. It used to be a single slab of black marble, long and wide enough for a human to lay on it comfortably. Or maybe not so comfortably if it had been a sacrificial altar. Was it? It didn't matter now anyway, because the altar was broken. The great slab of black stone had shattered and was laying on the floor in several pieces. That was the only thing in the temple that had changed. Sonny studied the broken altar for a while, his face slowly growing paler. There were too many mysteries surrounding this place. He concentrated, trying to remember everything he knew about the first nightmare, the dead gods, and the secrets of the fallen pantheon. And then his eyes widened. Of all the knowledge Sonny had learned in his life, of all the pieces of information gathered in his memory, one suddenly stood out. A memory that Sonny had never considered very significant and had no reason to. It was the evaluation the spell had given him after the first nightmare. Not the important part that had to do with the appraisal, but rather the slightly poetic summary that had been there seemingly on a whim, to add some flavor. Standing above the broken altar, Sonny whispered. A nameless slave ascended the Black Mountain. Both heroes and monsters fell by his hand. Unbroken, he entered the ruined temple of a long-forgotten god and spilled his blood on the sacred altar. The gods were dead, and yet they listened. The temple of a long-forgotten god. He inhaled deeply. Back then, Sonny had been an ignorant kid from the outskirts. He knew very little about the world, let alone about its greatest secrets. He had not known who the forgotten god was, and so he had not paid attention to these words. The spell had never uttered them after that, and neither used nor translated the runes describing the lost deity. Of course. Sonny looked around the ruined temple. Why had his sacrifice been made to all the gods? Perhaps because this temple had been built in the time before the memories of the seventh god were struck from the world. It was consecrated to worship Dream God as well, and therefore, when Dream God became forgotten, the temple was forgotten as well. Because worshiping the forgotten god was forbidden, just like worshiping the demons, his children was. Still, Sonny was sure that there were some who had disregarded the will of the gods and put their faith in forgotten God despite it. Otherwise, Scholar would not have heard stories of pilgrims climbing the Black Mountain in ancient times. The Temple of the Forgotten God. Sonny looked around the great hall with a complicated expression. He was himself forgotten by the world, so it wasn't hard to feel a sense of kinship for this forlorn ruin. He sighed and threw one last glance at the altar. There were deep shadows nestling deep below him, so Sonny knew that the temple extended underground. He had never got the chance to explore it during the first nightmare, so it was nice to have an opportunity now. He was curious to see what he would find out. Still, he would leave this place and continue toward Godgrave soon. There was no time to waste. Before that, however, Sonny froze. It was because he had felt something familiar when looking at the broken altar. Wait, no way can it be. The shattered slab of black marble gave off a subtle, but very familiar feeling. Sonny stared silently. It was a gateway. He had missed that fact at first, but now that he studied the broken altar closer, there was no doubt. It felt exactly like the one in the sanctuary of Noctis, the chained circle in the ivory tower, and the runic one in the crimson spire. And if the altar had been made into a gateway? Sonny looked around once more. Then the nameless temple was now a citadel. Suddenly he wanted to laugh. How fitting. He was a transcendent, and a homeless one at that. Most saints, however, were usually in control of a citadel, ruling it at the behest of their sovereign. There were exceptions, of course, like Saint Tyrus, who had lost the sanctuary of Noctis and had been exiled to Antarctica with her entire clan. Fortunately, White Feather was doing much better now. Sonny himself served no sovereign, and he wasn't even sure if he could take possession of a citadel. Citadels were created by the spell, after all, so he didn't know if controlling one was something that only a carrier of the spell could do. It was worth trying, though. He hesitated for a while. Then he hesitated some more. Right, but how do I actually claim a citadel? If there was an instruction manual for being a saint, Sonny had never received one. After thinking for a while, he retracted the onyx mantle, bared his forearm, and commanded the onyx shell to reduce the resilience of his skin there. Then he cut his forearm with his fingernail. Nothing happened. Letting out a frustrated sigh, Sonny also commanded Blood Weave to release a few drops of blood. Why was it so difficult to bleed a little? Several crimson drops fell on the broken altar and rolled down the surface of one of the black shards. There was no reaction. Once again, nothing happened. Sonny scratched the back of his head. The small cut on his forearm was already healing, and before too long it was entirely gone. At that time, he also came up with another idea. It can't be that simple, can it? Feeling uncertain, Sonny took a deep breath and silently released the tether connecting him to the ivory tower. Then he concentrated on his soul and started the process of placing a new one. He had a suspicion that it was very simple to claim a citadel. All that a carrier of the nightmare spell had to do was become a transcendent and use the gateway to return to the waking world. Then they would become anchored to that gateway and therefore take possession of the citadel. Unless it was already claimed, of course, in which case a more powerful saint would take control. However, Sonny was not a carrier of the nightmare spell, so he had to go through the process manually. Instead of allowing the spell to bind him to the gateway, he had to create that bond himself. And so, he was placing down a tether. The concept called tether by masters and saints was a mysterious but simple thing. It was a sort of imprint one could leave on the world by using their essence. The spot marked by the imprint was where one's soul was anchored to the world. Masters could only imprint themselves on the waking world, but saints could imprint themselves on the dream realm as well. In addition to that, the tethers placed by saints were much more expansive and deeply rooted in the fabric of the realm than those placed by masters. In fact, Sonny was quite certain that they were entirely different things. It was just that both served the same purpose, so humans just used the same word for both. The reason why transcendent tethers were so much more robust than the ascended ones was because of the nature of saints. The soul of a saint was connected to the world, and so it interacted with the world much closer. For example, saints could absorb spirit essence from their surroundings. In rare cases, they could also pour their soul essence out into the world. There was no need to mention how vital the former was, but the latter was more or less useless. The soul essence would swiftly dissipate if it wasn't poured into a special vessel, like a memory, for example. However, one time when pushing one's own essence onto the world was necessary was the process of creating a tether. If manipulated in a special way, the essence would leave an imprint on the area where it had been unleashed before dissipating. That imprint was the tether, and since it maintained a faint connection with the saint's soul, it was possible to pull on the connection to step between realms and return to the place where one's soul was imprinted. Only two tethers could exist at a time, one in each world. It was necessary to break the connection with the old one before creating a new one. Well, in Sonny's case, each of his incarnations could place two of their own. Regardless, that was what Sonny was doing now. He was pushing his essence into the world and controlling its flow to create an imprint. The process took some time and was quite arduous. However, he was not doing it blindly. Instead of allowing his essence to cover the area freely, he tried to concentrate all of it in an isolated spot, namely, the gateway of the ancient temple. Soon, his tether started to take form. And then something unexpected happened. There seemed to be a strange reaction between the gateway and the forming tether. It was as if the two had been created to exist together all along. Not only did the strain on Sonny lessen significantly, as if the process had taken on a life of its own, but he also felt as if the imprint was becoming deeper and also different in some way. At the same time, Sonny felt something changing within his soul. It was as if a mystical bond was being established, connecting him to the ancient temple. He felt very strange. Diving into the soul sea, Sonny saw that the vast expanse of still water was still no more. Instead, it was surging, boiling almost, with great waves rolling on the dark surface. As if someone had thrown a huge boulder into the black water, sending ripples spreading across the silent expanse of his soul. What? As Sonny watched, astounded, the water at the very heart of the soul sea suddenly foamed. And then, a familiar black edifice rose from beneath the waves. A perfect replica of the nameless temple, how it had been before its roof collapsed, and its gates were broken, slowly rose from the lightless depths of his soul, bathing in the dark radiance of his 6 soul cores. Soon enough the surging waters calmed down, and the soul sea grew still and silent once more. It was as if nothing had happened. Only, there was a great temple of black stone standing on the still water now. Sonny stared at it with wide eyes. I'll be damned. That was pretty cool. He regretted not being connected to the spell once more. Sonny could feel a deep connection to his newly claimed citadel, but did not know what he could do with that connection and what it was meant for. If he was still a carrier of the spell, there would be helpful runes to guide him to the necessary understanding, without a doubt. But then again, the spell did not even explain the enchantments of the memories it created to most awakened. Who knew how helpful it would have been in the case of a citadel? Sonny knew that he would have to explore and investigate this matter personally. Until then, however, what do I even do now? He had not been planning to come in possession of an unknown citadel. Ruling one was not in his plans right now. He was in the middle of traveling to Godgrave. After hesitating for a while, Sonny sighed. Well, whatever. I can spend a few days here. Having a secret lair to return to wouldn't hurt anyway. His original body was anchored in the nameless temple now, so he had no choice but to consider it in his future plans. There was one silver lining to the unexpected situation, though. At least, Sonny wasn't homeless anymore. Several days later, Sonny was sitting on the steps of the nameless temple. The sun was traveling across the clear blue sky, and the snow covering the mountain peak was shining with its light. There was a stunned expression on his face. The other 5 incarnations were resting on the lower steps, panting heavily. One was tiredly rubbing his shoulders. Another was leaning on a broom made by manifesting shadows. A third one was sprawled on the black stone, lazily staring at the sky. There was one who was pouring dirty water out of a bucket, and another one who was looking at them with disdain. They had been busy cleaning up the temple for the last few days. The cleanup was mostly finished, but the reconstruction had not even begun. Sonny knew that he would need special stone to rebuild the broken roof. He could scavenge some from the ruined cathedral of the Dark City. Durable wood for the beams. Would he have to visit the burned forest again to harvest some? Luckily, he was good at all things having to do with craftsmanship, not only because of experience and practice, but also because of bone weave. His fingers were dexterous and responsive, like those of a master artisan. Any tool he needed, meanwhile, could be manifested from the shadows. However, the scope of the work that had to be done to restore the nameless temple to a decent state was not the reason why Sonny was spacing out right now. Instead, the reason was the discovery made by his original body. While the avatars had been busy with cleaning, he had explored his new citadel. Of course, he had discovered the mystical circle in the Undertemple almost immediately. However, it took him a while to figure out what that component did. The instinctual understanding of its purpose was hidden in the connection Sonny shared with the citadel. So it can move. He raised his gaze and studied the desolate mountain peak. Sonny assumed that the nameless temple had been built here, and wondered what madness forced the builders to carry the great weight of black marble to the top of a towering mountain. But now, he knew that the ancient temple had been built elsewhere, and had stood elsewhere, before appearing on this mountain peak one day. He also knew that it could move again, now that it had an owner once more. Slowly, a bold idea formed in his mind. Sonny lingered for a while, then looked at his avatars and studied each one for a few moments. Eventually, his gaze landed on the gloomy incarnation. He smiled. "Let's do it this way then." Some time later, a sudden commotion disturbed the deadly peace of Godgrave. A dark figure in an onyx armor reached the edge of the dead god's breastbone, covered in ash and blood. Behind him was a trail of severed flesh and broken bodies. The man's face was hidden behind a ferocious mask carved from black wood. Standing on the precipice of an abyssal drop, he gazed down silently, paying no heed to a wave of abominations rushing at him from behind. Then, a great temple built of black marble was suddenly standing on the bone plain. As the man wearing the demonic mask turned, 3 warriors clad in the same onyx armor walked out of the darkness under the eaves of the black temple. A graceful stone knight followed, wielding a black blade and a round shield. Then, a silvery fiend forged in the flames of hell, a tenebrous steed shrouded in the mantle of nightmares, and an enormous serpent with onyx scales. The dark dwellers of the Black Temple faced the tide of abominations calmly, and a few moments later, more blood flowed on the white surface of the ancient bone. A great darkness spread, hiding the battlefield from the cloudy sky. At the same time, far away, a young mundane girl was being taught how to slay nightmare creatures by an eccentric shadow. And further still, a trade caravan was approaching Bastion. Dozens of heavily loaded wagons were rolling down the road, pushed by monstrous echoes. A sizable force of Awakened was flanking the caravan, protecting it from the dangers of the dream realm. Their expressions were clear now that the Lake City was in view. A handsome young man with porcelain skin and onyx eyes was sitting on the bed of one of the wagons, leaning his back against a wooden crate and looking ahead with a beautiful smile on his lips. He didn't seem that strong, and wore an elegant black mantle instead of durable armor. Far away, the awesome silhouette of a great castle was slowly revealing itself from the shimmering waters of a clear lake. The young man looked at it for a while, then glanced down at his shadow. "It seems that we've arrived." The shadow stared back at him, then shrugged indifferently. He smiled. "Yes, I think so too." Saying that, the young man looked up, at the silhouette of a white tower floating in the air above the castle. His face turned wistful for a moment, and then he looked away with a quiet sigh. "Ah, it's so pretty." In the courtyard of the nameless temple, Cassie let out a heavy sigh and looked away, hiding her eyes. Sonny remained silent, waiting for her to come to her senses. He hesitated for a few moments, then moved his chair back. The tea had grown cold. The refreshments did not look appetizing anymore. The leaves of the lonesome tree rustled peacefully in the darkness. After a while, Cassie's shoulders trembled. It has already begun. Her voice was distant. Sonny lingered for a few moments. This time, the memory he had shown her was not nearly as long as the previous one. The awesome desolation of the burned forest and the mysterious nature of the nameless temple were memorable and distinct. However, as expected, what had affected Cassie the most was the sight of Low 49. Of course, she would not know anything about that lunar observatory in particular, but it was unmistakably a modern building. There was no place for it in the dream realm. Knowing that, she would have instantly understood the meaning. Sonny raised an eyebrow. "You didn't know?" She shook her head slowly. He studied her delicate face, then let out a soft sigh. Finally, there was something he knew that Cassie didn't. However, that did not bring him any joy. After remaining silent for a while, he said neutrally, "It was an old lunar observatory, Low 49. It used to stand on the southern edge of the Antarctic Center, well, designated south at least. Obviously, every direction there is technically north of the pole." Sonny paused for a moment and then added, "The staff and soldiers who were garrisoned there were wiped out during the early stages of the chain of nightmares, and nobody has seen Low 49 since. I am the last human to have visited Antarctica, I think, but I never went that far south. So, I don't know when the observatory was swallowed by the dream realm." He smiled darkly. "It would be a bit funny if it wasn't so terrifying. While wandering the sword domain, I often felt that it was safer than some parts of our own world. Now, the difference between the two realms is even more vague. Soon enough, there will be none." Cassie did not respond, sitting motionlessly in the darkness. Eventually, she said in a quiet tone, "I'm sorry, I need to process the news." Sonny leaned back and allowed her to think in silence. After a while, he said evenly, "Does it change anything, though?" The war was still coming. Finally, Cassie faced him again. "Of course, it changes everything. I'll have to rethink a lot of things. The human enclaves in the dream realm are hardly self-sufficient, after all. It is difficult enough to provide food and shelter for 300 million people. To accommodate billions, even if it happens gradually over the span of a decade, a lot of development plans will have to be accelerated. Most communication still happens through the waking world. Data is stored digitally. The scope of it all is too much." She let out a shaky breath. "That is not even mentioning the fact that all the rules we know will become obsolete after our world is devoured by the dream realm. There will be no more nightmare gates, for example. No more division between the physical body and the spirit body, and so on. The spell will have to change accordingly. It might very well plunge us into a new horror, one that would make everything prior seem like a gentle prologue." Cassie was thinking as the right hand of a person who was supposed to take the throne of humanity. There was a heavy responsibility that came with the throne, of course. But to Sonny, her train of thought seemed a little funny, because they had not even come close to vanquishing the sovereigns yet. He smiled. "You seem to have a lot of plans for what happens after the fighting is over." Cassie faced him with a hint of surprise on her exquisite face. "I do, don't you?" Sonny chuckled. "Of course, more fighting. Their woes would not be over with the fall of Anvil and Kai Song. If anything, the true battle would only start after the war was over." She remained silent for a while, then nodded somberly. "You are right." A few moments later, the young woman added quietly, "But regardless of it all, I am glad that you found a reason to come back." Then Cassie faced him with a brittle smile. It might feel like the world has rejected you, but Sunny, it needs you as well." Saying these words, she turned away. "As do I and Nephis most of all." Sunny stared at her silently, a complicated mess of emotions rising in his heart. He wanted to say something, but didn't quite know what to say. In the end, he simply shrugged. "That is all right, because I need the world too, and Nephis, and you as well, Cassie." She smiled. "I'll remember." With that, she stood up and sighed. "Our time is up. If I linger any longer, some people in Bastion might grow suspicious of the purpose of my visit." Sunny nodded lightly and rose from his chair. He had brought Cassie here from NQSC, so he had to bring her back as well. Soon, the two of them appeared in a deserted alley in the depths of the outskirts. Cassie could use her own tether to return to Bastion immediately, but hesitated for a while. Eventually, she said with uncertainty, I won't say anything about what is happening between Nephis and you in Bastion." Sunny suppressed an embarrassed cough, feeling grateful for her decision to refrain from discussing that matter. The situation was strange and complicated enough already. Cassie took a deep breath. "I want you to know something, though." He raised an eyebrow. "What?" She lowered her head. "About how it feels on the other side. You see, I can't quite imagine how you feel being forgotten by everyone, but I do know how it feels to have forgotten. It is a strange thing. When we first met, I didn't know who you were. By all accounts, you were a stranger. And yet, there was this strange sense of familiarity. As if we've known each other all our lives." Cassie took a deep breath. There were other feelings as well, subtle and faint but undeniable. I won't describe them, but I am sure that Nephis is being swayed by these unconscious thoughts as well. Even if she can't retain the memories of you, the emotions those memories stir remain. So, she wasn't just captivated by Master Sunless because he is charming, handsome, and pleasant to be around. Cassie faced Sunny once again. You might think that her feelings are not quite real, because her knowledge of you is not quite true, and maybe you are right. But I still want you to respect them." She remained silent for a moment, then nodded. "That is all I wanted to say. You can decide what to do yourself." Before Sunny could say anything, she was gone. He stared at the empty space, where Cassie had stood expressionlessly. After a while, he sighed. "Did I just get thee if you hurt her I'll kill you talk?" The tone wasn't quite the same, but somehow it did feel like that. Chuckling, Sunny turned around and pulled on his tether. "If I hurt Nephis, she'll kill me herself. Well, at least she'll try. I am a bit hard to kill these days." Today was a strangely slow day for the brilliant Emporium. Actually, it wasn't that strange. Sunny had been complaining about how swamped he was in the kitchen when the business was good, but now that it was dull, he missed the money he could have made dearly. The lack of clients was not strange, but the mood in Bastion was, which, in turn, was the reason why so few people were visiting. It was an odd mixture of agitation and somber anticipation. People were incensed and indignant about the attempt on Neff's life, which was attributed to Clan Song more and more. But, at the same time, some of them were disturbed by the swiftly changing tone of public opinion. After all, people weren't fools. Many could recognize the malignant roots of the spreading rumors. They might not know who was behind the propaganda, but they could at least sense that they were being lied to. Others had enough foresight to see where the volatile situation was headed, even if they did not know why. All in all, there were as many dissenting voices as those wishing to hold the Queen of Worms responsible. It was all happening a little too quickly. Sunny was still reeling from the recent conversation with Cassie. Now that he knew how fast the war was approaching, his own mood had turned strange as well. Luckily, he did not have a lot of time to worry about such things. He was terribly busy despite the lack of customers. Most of his time was dedicated to designing the weave of the soul sword. but he was also preoccupied with something else. Because his date with Nephi's was approaching much faster than the war. Damn it, what to do, what to do? The pressure of designing a perfect date was more daunting than his attempts to weave a soul-bound weapon. He had acted confidently when asking her out, but now that he actually had to come up with something, Sonny felt like his mind was paralyzed. Why did I prepare a picnic for a fake date? I should have saved that idea for the real one. There were not a lot of romantic places in Bastion. Even worse, Sonny was not that knowledgeable about romance. And worse still, Nephi's was not exactly a typical young lady who knew what her idea of a romantic encounter was. In short, Sonny was stumped. And Aiko wasn't helping. What's the problem, boss? Just take her to an inn. I mean, you are both adults. There are inns that charge by the hour, you know. He glared at her silently. You are the problem. Do you want to get me killed? Aiko laughed. All right, I'm joking. Honestly, though, I say you are overthinking it. Anything and anywhere will be fine. After all, the only necessary ingredients are you and her. Since both of you will be present, that's most of the work done. She glanced at him and asked, just be yourself. Draw from your experience. What's the most romantic memory you have? Sonny scratched the tip of his nose. Well, I spent a month being stuck on the corpse of a giant nightmare creature with a girl once. Aiko stared at him silently for a few moments. On second thought, don't be yourself. Forget everything about your experience. Just take her on a boat ride or something. Sonny's eyes brightened. A boat ride? Huh, that's actually not a bad idea. He would have said more, but at that moment, his expression changed subtly. Sonny looked at the door. He could sense a group of people approaching the brilliant emporium, and they did not feel like his usual customers at all. Heavy armor, sharp weapons, disciplined movements, clear intent. Soldiers. Why would a cohort of awakened warriors of clan valor be approaching his humble shop? For a moment, Sonny thought about how he would kill them. Dealing with these awakened would only take him a few moments. Then, he could dismiss the mimic, grab Aiko, and step through the shadows to outside the city. After that, Valor would not be able to catch him unless Anvil took action personally. If his cover was blown, that was the only way. However, he quickly dismissed that idea. First of all, even if his cover was somehow blown, they would most likely only learn that he was the Lord of Shadows. The Lord of Shadows was an ally of Clan Valor, so there was nothing to be afraid of. Secondly, in the much worse scenario, where the elders of Clan Valor had learned that he was plotting to murder the king with Nephi's, there would not have been a mere cohort of awakened approaching his shop. So, why the hell are they here then? Sonny was very confused. What's the matter, boss? Aiko looked at him apprehensively. He hesitated for a moment. I have no idea, really. At that moment, the soldiers reached the brilliant emporium. Then, there was a loud knock on the door. Don't eat them. Giving Mimic a mental warning, Sonny sighed, put on a pleasant smile, and went to open the door. Welcome to the brilliant emporium. How may I help you? He was met with an unfriendly stare. 6 awakened warriors were standing a few steps back, while one was looking at him with disdain. The man was tall and sharp, clad in an enchanted armor, with a vermilion cloak hanging from his broad shoulders. He was also an ascended Master Sunless. Hearing the deep voice, Sonny smiled a little wider. That's what they call me, yes. The knight nodded. Please come with me. Ugh. Sonny blinked a couple of times. Why? The man glanced at him with badly hidden irritation, and then said coldly, I was ordered to escort you to the castle. Please follow. What the hell? Sonny hesitated for a bit, wondering if it wasn't too late to kill them and escape. But he had to reluctantly abandon that idea. Why, by all means. Exchanging a glance with Aiko, he shrugged helplessly and followed the knight out of the brilliant emporium. He tried to strike up a conversation a few times on the way to the castle, but his escorts seemed to be in a foul mood. They were definitely not fans of Sunny, that was for sure. With his sharp hearing, he could catch a few of them muttering under their breaths. Damned mongrel. No, really. What was going on? Was he going to get splashed in the face with water and be given a tidy sum of soul shards to never see Nephi's again? That was what usually happened in dramas. Sunny had thought of 1,000 possible reasons for this unexpected visit, each more ominous than the previous one. However, he failed to learn the truth until the very end. The escorts brought him across the lake, and then to the very heart of the castle. When Sunny was led to the main keep, where the direct line of Clan Valor resided, he was on the verge of collapsing from fright. Half an hour later, he somehow found himself in a grand hall, facing none other than Morgan, the Princess of War. Morgan was leaning on a stone throne, holding a sharp sword in her hand. Her gaze was piercing. Suddenly, Sunny felt a chill run down his spine. She doesn't know, does she? The last time they met was during the assassination attempt. Of course, back then, Sunny was wearing the persona of the Lord of Shadows. Morgan's cold gaze traveled across his figure, making him shiver. Then her scarlet lips parted. "Oh." Morgan's voice sounded calm. "I understand now." Sunny struggled to keep a deep scowl off his face. What does she understand? Smiling faintly, Morgan descended from the dais and approached him. The sharp blade of her sword glistened in the rays of sunlight. "Master Sunless, I presume." Sunny nodded and forced himself to speak. "Princess Morgan, it's an honor." She stared at him with a strange expression, then cleared her throat. "Indeed, please kneel." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "Pardon." Her gaze turned a little dark. "I told you to kneel." He hesitated for a few moments, glanced at his escorts, and then elegantly lowered himself to one knee. Morgan has grown immensely strong after transcending. Still, if she attacks, I should be able to dodge. She raised her sword slowly, and at the same time he prepared to call upon the shadows. However, to his shock, the sword did not fall down to cut his neck. Instead, Morgan touched the blade to his left shoulder lightly, then repeated the same process with his right shoulder and the crown of his head. Sunny was dumbstruck. What is going on? Having finished the strange action, Morgan dismissed her sword and smiled in satisfaction. "Master Sunless, I hereby proclaim you a knight of valor. Rise, Sir Sunless, may your edge never dull." Sunny's eyes widened. Pardon." Sunny was so stunned that he did not know what to say. All he could think was, "What the hell? No, really. Him, a knight of valor." His mind short-circuited for a moment. Of all the things Sunny had expected when a cohort of unfriendly soldiers invited him to the castle, that one never crossed his mind. Still standing on one knee, he raised his head and looked at Morgan with a dumbfounded expression. She studied his face for a few moments, then clicked her tongue and turned away. "That will be all, you can go now." Remembering that he had been allowed to rise, Sunny slowly stood up. "Princess Morgan, please excuse my impudence, but if I may ask." Before he could ask anything, though, the guards unceremoniously grabbed him and escorted him out of the hall. A moment later, the door was slammed shut, hiding her bewitching figure from sight. Just like that, his very short and very baffling audience with Morgan of Valor ended. Sunny was left standing in the corridor, not sure what to do. He blinked a couple of times. Are they forcefully conscripting independent masters? That was the only thing he could think of. But then, it didn't make any sense. If Clan Valor really wanted to conscript him into the army on the eve of war, they would have gone about it in a different manner. Forcing a master with no loyalty to fight for them could do more harm than good. Slowly, Sonny realized that a person who he had assumed was just passing by was actually standing still and staring at him. Composing himself a little, he looked up. There was a dignified middle-aged man in a well-tailored livery standing in front of him. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his expression was perfectly stoic. Noticing that Sonny was paying attention, the man nodded. "Sir Sunless, I am Sebastian, the steward of the great clan Valor. Allow me to congratulate you on your knighthood." Sonny took a deep breath. "I'm not dreaming, am I?" He exhaled slowly. There was actually a steward named Sebastian in Bastion. That was just a little bit too much, wasn't it? Worst of all, Sonny couldn't even sense the man's rank. He could have been a mundane person or a saint. Sonny forced out a polite smile and said, "Nice to meet you. Ah, please forgive my lack of manners. I have to admit I am extremely vexed right now. Can you explain what is going on?" The middle-aged steward nodded. "Certainly, sir. You've just been granted the title of a Knight of Valor. Oh, additionally, you have also been appointed as the Knight Commander of the Ardent Wardens. What an honor." Sonny closed his eyes for a moment. "Ardent Wardens? Who are these Ardent Wardens?" The steward gave him a dignified smile. Ardent Wardens are a grassroots volunteer organization that holds various activities to enrich the daily lives of the elderly citizens of Bastion. Food drives, cultural events, interest clubs, and the like. Self-governed. Sonny stared at him silently, struggling to maintain a calm expression. So, if these Ardent Wardens are self-governed, then why do they need a knight commander? No, wait. Why does a volunteer organization dealing with bored elderly people need one? The middle-aged man nodded seriously. Exactly. There was not a hint of sarcasm in his esteemed voice, but somehow, Sonny got the impression that he was being mocked. He was very confused. "So, what are my responsibilities as a knight commander exactly?" The steward lingered for a moment, then said in a solemn tone, "There are none, Sir Sunless. Well, I should rather say that there is only one. It is to uphold the dignity of the great clan Valor. Don't do anything that would besmirch the prestige of the royal family, and you should be good." He paused and then added neutrally, "Of course, you will receive a monthly stipend, as well as other benefits befitting a man of your station." Sonny stared at him some more. "Crazy? I'm going crazy. So, let me get this straight. I was made a knight, but I don't have to perform the duties of a knight. There is nothing I am responsible for, but I am going to be paid for doing nothing." Sebastian smiled. "Your wisdom is unmatched, Sir Sunless. You put it all so eloquently." With that, he walked away at a brisk pace and beckoned for Sonny to follow. "Now please come with me." Sonny suppressed a frustrated groan and hurried after the steward. Coming, but where are we going?" The middle-aged man answered in a refined manner. "As a knight commander, you are to receive a list of items. 2 sets of full dress attire, 2 finely dyed tabards, a parade cloak with an embroidered crest, an unadorned winter cloak, an embroidered battle banner, a painted household banner, a leather waist belt with an engraved silver buckle." Sonny silently covered his face with a palm. Some time later, he was standing alone in one of the courtyards of the castle, holding a sizable pack. His expression was absent. The steward had basically chased him away from the keep after assembling the list of items that a knight was eligible to receive. The man had refused to answer Sonny's tentative question until the very end, finding inventive ways to tactfully dodge them every time. It was just that, how could Sonny put it? Steward Sebastian did not seem to have kept the truth from him on purpose. Rather, it looked like the dignified man was too embarrassed to answer directly, as if saying it aloud would be a disgrace. Sonny stared into the distance silently. I guess I am a knight of valor now. Weirder things had happened. Granted, just a few. In any case, at least the whole thing was such a formality that he had not even been forced to give an oath of allegiance. Neither had he been issued any memories. With the war approaching, clan valor did not seem keen to waste resources on a fake knight. That was a good thing for Sonny, because he did not want to receive a sword forged by anvil. Nor was he capable of receiving one. There was no spell to facilitate the transfer of memories between him and its carriers, after all. He would also be receiving a monthly stipend of soul shards. Sonny sighed. Wow, nepotism is truly the best. By now, he had figured out that his sudden knighthood had something to do with his connection to Nephi's. It was just that the initiative must have come from some other entity in the great clan, which was why the signals had crossed. So there was nothing left to do except return home. Sonny was ready to take a step forward, but then froze for a moment. He was currently in a courtyard, a different one from where he had dueled young Master Tristan, but the mood was quite similar. There were more than a few unfriendly gazes aimed his way. Looking around, he saw various knights and squires, all staring at him with cold expressions. Sonny gulped. They had already hated him before for having the audacity to accompany their princess. Now that Morgan had knighted him for no good reason. It did not look good. Even Sonny was starting to hate himself a little. Who wouldn't hate a handsome freeloader? Gods, I won't have to fight another duel, will I? As a matter of fact, he had the feeling that, this time, there would be no duel. Instead, there would be a thorough beating. Or an attempt of one, at least. Sonny looked around once more, noticing that several knights were already approaching him slowly with dark faces. Right, I just need to defuse the situation. Be polite and keep calm. Be polite. One of the knights snarled through gritted teeth. I didn't believe it. Hey, you, mongrel, have you know? Sonny's eye twitched, and he opened his mouth to retort. Before he could, however, there was a rustle of wings, and suddenly, a breathtaking figure was standing between him and the incensed knights. Shielding him with her radiant wings, Nephi's frowned and looked at them scornfully. What is going on here? Seeing that a literal saint had fallen from the sky, the approaching knights froze and looked away in embarrassment, or rather, they tried. However, they were too mesmerized by Neph's appearance, with her beautiful white wings, tousled silver hair, and flawless figure. She looked nothing short of stunning. It was as if a celestial deity had suddenly descended into the mortal world, illuminating it with her pure light. Additionally, she wasn't wearing her usual elegant attire or polished armor. Instead, she was dressed in simple clothes made out of soft white fabric, which seemed almost like loungewear, and contoured the graceful lines of her body well. Too well, maybe. Suddenly, Sonny felt an overwhelming impulse to walk in front of Nephi's and shield her from their gazes instead. What are you staring at, bastards? To be fair, there was nothing lascivious in their gazes. Instead, the knights were strangely stuck between embarrassment, admiration, and a bit of remnant contempt directed at Sonny. It was a funny sight. What is going on here? Neph's voice was cold, and her expression was stern. White sparks danced in her piercing gray eyes. The knights shivered, instantly losing their rancor. And nothing, Lady Nephi's. We apologize for our rudeness. Please don't mind us. She scowled. If there is nothing going on, then I suggest you be on your way. Her voice was even, but the seasoned knights suddenly turned pale. A moment later, they were gone. It was quite amazing, actually. The skills of these warriors were truly formidable. If Sonny did not know any better, he would have thought that they were blown away by the wind. What a splendid movement technique! Knights of valor were known for their indomitability in battle, but it seemed that they knew a thing or two about how to retreat as well. While he was considering admiring their swift withdrawal, Nephi's huffed quietly and turned to him. Her scornful expression instantly disappeared, replaced by a subtle look of concern. She lingered for a moment. "I am sorry, are you all right?" Sonny couldn't help but gaze at her deeply, taking in every little detail of her. Eventually, he remembered himself and answered in a slightly stifled tone. "Ah, yes, I am fine." Then he tilted his head a little, glanced at the distant silhouette of the Ivory Island, and looked back at Nephi's. "I'm sorry, Lady Nephi's, but did you just jump down after noticing that I'm in trouble?" He had not put two and two together immediately, but now that he took a better look at her, there were a few strange details. Her comfortable clothes, unkempt hair, and slight signs of agitation were far from the composed image Nephi's usually presented to the public. So it wasn't hard to surmise that this appearance had not been planned. Nephi's froze for a moment, glanced down at herself, then awkwardly swiped a lock of her hair back, putting it behind her ear. Sonny could have sworn that she blushed a little. "Ah, well, I happened to be free when Cassie informed me that something was afoot, so here I am." She studied his face to make sure that everything was indeed all right, then looked at the pack in his hands in confusion. "That said, what exactly happened? She only told me that you were taken to the main keep." Her expression hardened. "Did someone harass you? Was it my sister? What did she say?" Sonny remained silent for a few moments, not knowing how to answer. Eventually, he gave her a reassuring smile. "Oh no, nothing like that. Nobody harassed me. I was indeed summoned by Princess Morgan, but for a different reason. Well, I'm not sure how to say it." Neff's frown only deepened. "A different reason, you say? What reason might that be?" Sonny coughed. "Well, it's like this. She made me a knight of valor." He did not know what Nephi's had expected to hear, but it definitely wasn't this. For a moment, she seemed startled. "What?" He smiled helplessly. "It's how I said. I was given the title of a knight and the post of the Knight Commander of the Ardent Wardens. Oh, the Ardent Wardens are a group of volunteers who do community service, mainly taking care of the elderly. Yeah, I was told that my only responsibility is to maintain the prestige of the royal family, whatever that means." Nephi stared at him for a while, then sighed and covered her face with a hand. After a few moments of silence, she said in a flat tone, "I am sorry. It's my fault. They were probably unhappy with me dating a man of no background. I expected opposition, but who would have thought that Morgan would be so accommodating?" Sonny blinked a couple of times. "Oh, so it's because of my lowly background, I see." She lowered her hand and looked at him with a startled expression. "No, I didn't mean it like that." Sonny smiled. "I know, you're not a conceited person. If anything, to be honest, between the two of us, I am probably more of a bigot. I actually have quite a prejudice against the legacy clans. Although, it might be a bit bold of me to admit something like that while attempting to court a princess of a great clan. Oh well, what can I do? That just goes to show how the lack of pedigree results in a lack of common sense and decorum." Hearing his light-hearted tone, Nephi's relaxed a little. She lingered a little, then met his smile with a tentative one of her own. "Then, I am grateful that you are willing to put your prejudice aside and give this princess a chance. You are an admirably broad-minded person, Master Sunless." He laughed. "No one has ever accused me of being broad-minded before. It's just that I would have to be mad to let my pettiness stand in the way of seeing you, Lady Nephi's." Then he suddenly froze. "Right. Weren't they supposed to go on a date in a few days?" Meeting her today, therefore, was a bit awkward. What was he supposed to do? Pretend that they had not made plans, or try to woo her right now? Noticing his puzzlement, Nephi's asked, "What's wrong?" Sonny hesitated for a few moments. "No, it's nothing. It's just that, to be honest, I've been thinking about our date a lot. Constantly, even. I've been looking forward to it so much that meeting you all of a sudden is a bit of a shock. Well, I know that you are terribly busy, Lady Nephi's, so I'll see you in a few days." She looked at him silently for a while. Then she smiled subtly. "Actually, I'm not that busy. How about we just make it today?" They parted soon after. For a little bit. Sonny might not have known a lot about women, but he knew enough not to try taking Nephi's on a date immediately. Women had their mysterious rites and rituals, after all. If he invited her anywhere without giving her a chance to clean up and change out of her loungewear into something more flattering, he would have earned the scorn of the entire womankind. Granted, those light clothes of hers were flattering enough already. Although not exactly sparse, they did a splendid job of accentuating every pure thoughts. In any case, the brief parting worked in his favor as well. While Nephi's returned to the Ivory Island to get ready, Sonny scrambled to arrange a few things. About an hour later, he was waiting by the riverside dock, holding the familiar picnic basket in one hand. It was a blessing that there were two bodies at his disposal here in Bastion. Otherwise, he would have never managed to prepare in time. Not only did he have to make arrangements, but he also had to quickly assemble a delightful meal for a romantic getaway. One body had been running around and outside the city, while the other had been busy in the kitchen. Luckily, he managed to finish everything in the nick of time. Suppressing a hint of nervousness, Sonny couldn't help but look up at the graceful silhouette of the ivory tower hovering among the clouds. He almost expected to see a beautiful figure descending from the sky in a mantle of sunlight. But due to the location of where they had arranged to meet, Nephi's decided to be less conspicuous. If Changing Star had indeed landed on a lively street in all her radiant glory, the commotion caused by her arrival would not have been small. Therefore, she simply walked up to him like a normal person, appearing from an alley. Of course, there was still a big reaction. A saint was not someone who could be ignored, and Nephi's was not just any saint. Wearing a simple white summer dress and no jewelry, she was still stunning. The passerby couldn't help but react to her beauty, and a lot of heads had been involuntarily turned. Sonny felt his heart skip, knowing that today that beauty was just for him. As she approached with a light smile, he heard a quiet and melodious ringing. He had not told her a lot about the destination of their date, but he did tell her that it would have something to do with water. So, Nephi's summoned the familiar pair of silver anklets, which were a memory she had used on the great river to help her move in the water. Sonny couldn't help but smile when looking at her. Nephi's walked over, stopped near him, and asked in a light tone, "So, Master Sunless, where are you taking me?" He hesitated for a moment. Out there in the waking world it was winter, and bitter cold haunted the snowy streets. But here in Bastion it was still summer. The entire city was bathed in smoldering heat. People were seeking shelter from the incandescent sun and the shade, and longing for cool drinks. Of course, as saints, both Sonny and Nephi's could ignore the sultry weather, but that did not mean that they would not enjoy the refreshing feeling of cooling down their bodies. He smiled. "To a beach." Nephi's tilted her head a little. "A beach." Sonny nodded. "It might sound a little silly, but actually, I've always dreamed of going to the beach. It's just that there were none where I grew up. Actually, I'm not entirely sure if there are any left in the waking world." He paused for a moment, and then added with a smile, "But I've learned that there is actually one not far from Bastion. So, would you mind making a dream of mine come true, Lady Nephi's?" She looked at him with a hint of mirth. "How would I dare refuse? I remember you telling me that you'd given up on having dreams. Fortunately, you seem to have found one, so I'd be delighted to help you fulfill it." The corner of Neff's mouth twisted upward, and she added with a hint of teasing in her tone, "However, are you sure that you don't just want to see me in a bathing suit, Master Sunless?" He looked at her seriously. I promise that I don't just want to see you in a bathing suit." His tone was earnest, but there was a subtle accent on the word just. She laughed. "If you say so, then how do we get to this beach?" Sonny offered her his arm. "Follow me." Once she wrapped her arm around his, he guided her to the dock. There were several rivers feeding the Mirror Lake and one it gave birth to. That river was much more modest than the great river of tears that flowed through the entire Song domain, but it was still deep and full. Its destination was also the same. It flowed south, toward the Storm Sea. Bastion was much further south and closer to the Storm Sea than Ravenheart, so the river wasn't very long. It could be quite dangerous for the same reason. Powerful sea monsters sometimes entered the estuary and swam far upstream, attracted by the smell of human souls. They never reached the Mirror Lake, though, because the citadel of Clan Dagonet stood between Bastion and the sea. The powerful abominations from the depths always died trying to breach the river fortress. Nevertheless, the length of the river between Bastion and the stronghold was not entirely safe. But Sonny judged that nothing in this tamed region of the Dream Realm could seriously threaten him and Nephi's. Very few things out there could. What he cared about was that there was a wild beach not too far down the river. It was beautiful, peaceful, and remote, a perfect place for a date on a hot summer day. That was where he wanted to take Neph. There were several wooden longships tied to the pier, their bows carved to resemble dragons and serpents. These dracars belonged to Clan Dagonet and were used to patrol the river and guard the trade ships coming from the Storm Sea. There were also several barges meant to deliver supplies to the river fortress and the town that had grown around it. Most importantly, there were plenty of small river boats. "Thanks, Aiko." Sonny guided Nephi's to one of the boats, which he had rented from the owner in advance. It was just large enough to fit 2 people and a bit of cargo, with a single pair of oars at the stern. She looked at it curiously. "Are we sailing down the river?" Sonny hesitated for a moment, then smiled helplessly. "Well, more like rowing down the river. Oh, I'll be the one handling the oars, of course. Why, you don't like it?" "Should I kill Aiko a little?" Nephi's looked at the boat, then at the river and finally back at him. Eventually she smiled. "No, I love it." Sonny let out a relieved sigh. "Aiko can live. Should I give her a raise?" Sonny held Neff's hand to help her step into the boat, then untied it, pushed it away from the berth, and jumped inside nimbly. His movements were so light that the boat did not rock at all. Nephi sat down on the bench at the front, while he took his place on the bench at the stern. They were facing each other, with only the picnic basket between them. He took the oars and moved them gently, guiding the boat to the middle of the river. It floated smoothly, cutting the water with a pleasant sound. The lively streets of Bastion crawled past them, with plenty of interesting scenes to be seen. The further from the shore they moved, the quieter it became, until the bustle of the city had turned into a quiet hum. Sonny was not looking around, though. He was looking at Nephi's, and in turn, she was looking at him. Both were smiling. Nephi's leaned to the side and lowered a hand into the water. Watching her fingers cut its surface, she sighed deeply and then closed her eyes for a moment. Her features relaxed. "How peaceful." Hearing her say that made him happy. Sonny extended his shadow sense in all directions, so he knew that there were no nightmare creatures hiding under the water. He did not spoil the mood by telling her to be careful. Instead, he used the few moments she had her eyes closed to stare at her with an unabashed craving. Then he averted his eyes and concentrated on rowing. After a while, Nephi's looked at him with a subtle smile. The city was behind them by then. There were no other boats on the river, and no ships in sight. The only sounds breaking the silence were the rustle of water and the soft splashes produced by the oars. She leaned back a little and asked in a leisurely tone, "Won't you grow tired from rowing?" Sonny chuckled. It was obviously a question asked for the sake of being polite. He was supposed to be a master. After all, guiding a small boat downriver would not tire him. He could have used a measure of strength suitable for an ascended and sent the boat flying at great speed to strain himself, but then the oars would probably explode into splinters. That wouldn't be nice at all. Oh, I might not look it, but actually I'm quite strong. He let go of one of the oars for a moment and showed her his hand. These hands of mine can crush mountains. Nephi's laughed. I'm sure. Still, I feel guilty watching you do all the work. Sonny remained silent for a moment. Then, his smile turned a little daring. Why don't you come here and help me then? She looked at him, then rose with a smile and moved to the rear bench. Sonny shifted to the side to give her some room. A few moments later, they were sitting side by side, each holding one oar. The bench wasn't quite wide enough to fit two people, so their bodies were pressed tightly against each other. The cool breeze was caressing them gently, and the sun reflected beautifully from the surface of the water. The river was peaceful and quiet. Sonny could feel the heat of her body through his clothes, and she could undoubtedly feel his. He inhaled deeply. Rowing a boat in this manner was a little tricky. The oars had to move both simultaneously and with equal amounts of force. Otherwise, the small vessel would either turn to the shore or start spinning in place. But Sonny and Nephi's easily fell into a comfortable rhythm. They were perfectly in sync. The oars rose and fell in tandem with each other, and the boat remained perfectly straight. It was rocking a little, though, and due to the fact that they were so close, each holding an oar with one hand, maintaining balance was a little tedious. Sonny moved his free arm and wrapped it around Neff's waist, firmly holding her in place. She glanced at him with a smile, then did the same. Just like that, they remained silent for a while, rowing in harmony while enjoying the breeze, the peaceful quiet of the river, and each other's warmth. The silence between them wasn't awkward or tense. Instead, it was comfortable and soothing, easing their tired minds. After a while, Nephi's looked at him and asked, "What are you thinking about?" Sonny lingered for a moment, then shrugged slightly. "Just life, I guess. How it is sometimes full of sorrow and sometimes full of joy." She studied his face carefully, then turned to enjoy the view of the river. "Interesting. My life is quite different, I think. I am content at times, and at other times I am resentful, but I don't really feel joy or sorrow that much. Mostly I am just focused. Actually, I feel a little guilty if I am too happy or too sad. It makes me feel that I have allowed myself to become distracted." He looked at her curiously. That was how Nephi's was. She lived in service of her goal, which didn't mean that she was miserable. It just meant that her mind was preoccupied with practical matters. And she mostly drew both satisfaction and discontent from the actions undertaken to realize her aspiration. That was a valid way to live a life. Still, Sonny felt that she was being too harsh on herself. He hesitated for a moment. "Really? Then, when was the last time you felt joy? And when was the last time you felt sorrow?" Nephi's looked at the river with a faint smile. She remained silent for a bit, then answered in an easy tone, "I don't quite remember." Sonny kept looking at her, not saying anything. Was it because it was not important to her, so she had forgotten? Or was it because her joys and sorrows had all been connected to him? He hugged her tighter. Sensing it, she turned to face him and smiled. "What about you?" Sonny blinked a couple of times and answered honestly, "Why, I am full of joy right now." Hearing Neff laugh, he smiled brightly. "As for sorrow, I had to throw out a batch of strawberries because there were too few customers in the cafe as of late. That was really sad." Her laugh grew a little louder. That made him happy as well. After a while, Nephi's looked at him, lingered for a few moments, and then said neutrally, "This was a really great idea. I have a bit of history with boats, you know." Sunny knew, of course. From the boat she had built from the bones of a demon to cross the dark sea to Anank's Ketch, the two of them had shared many poignant moments while rocking on the water. Nephi sighed. "I once sailed down a great river with a dear person. That person is gone, but the fondness remains." He couldn't do anything but hold her close. Sunny knew that she was talking about Anank, but even though she could not remember him, these words described the two of them too. Looking ahead, he smiled and said, "Then it's good to forge new memories, to remember them fondly as well, one day in the future." Eventually, the beach he had wanted to take her to appeared in sight. By then, basked in her warmth, Sunny felt a bit regretful that it did. Bastion used to be surrounded by a vast, lush forest. Sadly, the entire forest had been one giant, dreadful abomination, a fallen titan that possessed immense power and almost inexhaustible vitality. The Knights of Valor had risen to become one of the deadliest forces among the early carriers of the nightmare spell precisely because the warriors of the future great clan had spent decades fighting against the titanic forest and its horrid spawns. There were no masters and no saints back then, and yet they managed to push it back from the shores of the Mirror Lake. Nevertheless, Bastion had still been besieged by the hungry woods from all sides, and it was only after the second generation of Awakened came of age that the situation changed. One of the sons of the famed founder of Clan Valor took command of the Knights and waged a ruthless war against the vast Titan. Today, everyone knew the name of that son, for he had become the King of Swords. As for the abominable forest, it was long gone, burned to the ground, the ashes scattered by the winds. A bustling city and fertile fields now stretched where impenetrable woods once stood, blocking the light of the sun and drowning the land in darkness. Sunny and Nephi's had traveled far enough downstream to leave the settled parts behind, though. Now tall trees crowded the shore, these ones quite docile and not dangerous at all, unless one went digging for their roots or tried to cut them down at least. There was a river bend not too far away, and the trees retreated a little along its curve, forming a sequestered beach. Emerald leaves were rustling like a vast sea, and sunlight poured from the pure azure sky. The air was shimmering from the sweltering heat. Further away from shore, the ground was covered by moss and swaying grass, but there was a wide strip of golden sand near the water. It was beautiful and peaceful, like a picture out of a book. Sunny smiled when he saw the picturesque view. "We're here." The two of them carefully guided the boat to the shore. Nephi's jumped down onto the sand, looked around, and inhaled deeply. She seemed at ease and relaxed, which was a rare sight. Sunny, at least, did not remember when was the last time he had seen her in such a serene mood. Perhaps it was never. Picking up the picnic basket, he jumped to the beach, then grabbed the bow of the boat with his free hand and pulled it ashore as if it did not weigh anything. Then, he studied their surroundings with a curious expression. How nice. Suffice it to say, Sunny wasn't a big fan of getting wet, simply because the spell had never missed a chance to drop him into some damnable body of water. Nevertheless, now that he was on an actual beach, the idea of spending a pleasant day playing in the water and basking in the sun did not seem terrible at all. Especially in the present company. Nephi's glanced at him curiously. "Well, what do you think? Is it everything you dreamed of?" Sunny chuckled. It's not bad, I guess. We'll see how things go." This outing of theirs was entirely spontaneous, and they had spent quite a while getting here. Needless to say, Sunny had not had a chance to eat before due to being summoned to the castle and running around to prepare the date, so he had worked up an appetite. Nephi's was most likely the same. He found a good spot near the water and placed the basket down. Opening it, Sunny produced a beautifully embroidered blanket, laid it on the sand, and then moved the basket to its middle. Looking at Neph, he asked, "Would you like to eat something, Lady Nephi's?" She studied him for a few moments, then shook her head with a smile. "Actually, I think I want to cool down a little first." He nodded. "Oh." Then his expression changed a little. "Oh." Before Sunny could react, Nephi's took a step back and pulled her dress off. She was wearing a white swimming suit beneath. It was not too modest and not too revealing, hiding everything that needed to be hidden just well enough to set his imagination ablaze. He barely managed not to gulp. Her alabaster skin, her glistening silver hair, her striking eyes, the smooth lines of her supple body, it was a lot to take in. Her figure was slender and athletic, with a flat stomach and perfectly defined muscles, as expected from a person who spent most of her time either in battle or practicing the sword. However, it wasn't harsh and cumbersome. Instead, it was beautiful and soft in all the right. I should probably look away. Sunny struggled to maintain his mental composure, knowing that she could sense the intensity of his longing. His struggles had limited success. Nephi's chuckled, then turned around and stepped into the water. Then she looked at him over the shoulder. "Are you coming?" Sunny hesitated for a few moments. He wanted to, and he was going to eventually, but doing so meant that there was no way back, because he would have to dismiss the nebulous mantle to take a dive into the cool water. The mantle protected him from prying eyes and suppressed his presence. Once his presence was released, Nephi's would get a better measure of his power. She might not realize that he was a saint immediately. Some masters had one too, after all. Sunny himself had emanated a subtle presence as an ascended, for example. Plus, 5 of his shadows were far away, which diminished the ferocity of his presence a lot. But still, Nephi's would be able to realize the truth eventually. He wasn't quite ready to let that happen yet. Sunny smiled easily. "Go ahead first. I'll prepare things here and join you soon." She studied his face for a moment, then smiled and turned away. "Suit yourself." Not wasting any time, Nephi's dove into the cool water, escaping the summer heat with a splash. She moved away from shore with powerful strokes, then turned onto her back and continued swimming while looking at the vivid blue sky. Her tranquil gaze was full of joy. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.